Mike Taylor is going to join us. Dr. Mike Taylor serves as an associate professor in education and as the director of Catholic education for the graduate education program. He received his PhD from Marian University in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, with a focus on curriculum and instructional leadership and educational leadership. Having joined the University of Mary faculty after years as an educator in K-12, Mike's research and teaching focuses on the benefits of diversity as a vital component to the vibrant learning community. Aside from his passion to learn and teach, he enjoys downtime with his family. He's an avid reader of fiction and nonfiction, loves walking and hiking, and enjoys gardening with his wife, Kate, tinkering in the garage, and is an avid hunter and fisherman. His presentation today draws from his most recent work, a book-length study of the servant of God, Black Elk, and today his talk will show how Black Elk's life speaks that much more.
Thank you. I should first say that if you were expecting Monsignor Guillon to be here, we do have similar styles on the side, and he's a little taller than me, but he will be here on December 1st. We just kind of switched spots. But he'll also be speaking on Black Elk through the context of being kind of a missionary because he serves on the Standing Rock Reservation. So noticing that no one's leaving, you've got the right information. Okay, good. So I thought what I'd do first to get us started, I think in a good way, would be in prayer, and then I'll kind of give a little bit more context in the way of an introduction because I think it's good to lay that foundation for the talk. So if we could just center ourselves and quiet ourselves in this busy, busy time. I know there's a lot going on campus in prayer, and you're welcome to join me in this prayer, or you're welcome to just in the silence of your heart meditate on this prayer. So let's pray. Heavenly Father, great Spirit, behold us who stand before you singing our song of thanksgiving of servant of God, Nicholas Black Elk. Faithfully he walked the sacred red road and generously witnessed the good news of our Lord Jesus Christ among the Native American people. We humbly ask you to hear the prayers we plead through his intercession. We ask Holy Mother Church to recognize his sanctity by acknowledging his presence among the company of saints and as one to imitate in his zeal for the gospel. Open our hearts to also recognize the risen Christ in other cultures and peoples, to your glory and honor through Christ our Lord. Amen. And Black Elk, servant of God, pray for us. Very good. Thank you. So I'll just extend that invitation a little bit. You heard some information. Thank you to Dr. Dukeshire for that invitation, and also the invitation to speak, the award, the Excellence Award. I appreciate that as well coming from the committee. It's just an honor, and I want to acknowledge all of you as being a big part of that. Students, staff, faculty, you're kind of part of that process, for me anyways, because there's so much in the way of consulting with you and talking to you and your prayers and your encouragement and your consultation. I really appreciate that. So in the way of a little bit more of an introduction, I'll just put some faces and names together. This group right here, this kind of a proud moment in the Taylor family. I had 3 of my own kids, and my wife Kate is here as well, graduate from the University of Marian in 2022. So kind of moving left to right real quick, that's Kate, the guy in the funny academic regalia, that's me. You can notice a size issue with our kids and me. That's always a good topic for conversation. The guy in the middle, that's our youngest son, Douglas, whose birthday is tomorrow, by the way. And he graduated with a degree in psychology from here. Moving to the right is Frances. She graduated with a degree in communications and now lives in the Twin Cities. August, that is his 2nd degree here at the University of Marian. Now he's working on his 3rd. He's working on his doctorate in business administration. He works at NISC in Mandan. And then our oldest son to the right, he graduated from the University of St. Thomas, and now he works at his alma mater, so he's, I think, very happy. Additional members to our family right below, the 2 Beagles, that's Bernie and Millie. Bernie's on the right, Millie's on the left. They are brother and sister, and they are purebred Beagles from the great town of Fessenden, North Dakota, and they're about 2.5 years old. So In the middle is the book that I worked on and put together. And just to give you a little context on that book, it is the kind of the work of 2 years of interviewing Macaw Black Elk, who's the great-great-grandson of Black Elk himself. So it was through Macaw's eyes that opened my eyes to the beauty and the wonder of Native American scholarship first, and then all the other canon of scholarship that's occurred from John Neihardt in the early 1920s and 30s all the way to today to kind of complement that. So that's kind of what has been the compilation. The faces you see, I'll get into more, are some of the ancestors and relatives of Black Elk who have been really informative to this topic. You could see the face of Crazy Horse over to the right and my son Michael. We try to make an annual pilgrimage there and hike up. It's called the Volks March. If you've never done it, please do it. Below is a really proud of a relationship with Dakota Goodhouse. He is a graduate of the University of Mary, and he's a Native scholar. And he's been a tremendous resource for myself. He's the person that has just enlightened me to this space that we're here today. And in a way of acknowledging the land, that this is called Maya Wasi Kapi. In Lakota, that means the place where they carry or dig for paint. Now, I don't want to encourage any students to go rooting around for caves in the bluffs or anything, but historically, Native people came from all over the place to find clay to use that for paint, for artistry, for winter counts, for pictographs, for all kinds of interesting things. Now, the picture that probably sticks out the most, and you're like, well, why is that up there, the castle thing, is that's just trips that we've made to Ireland. And what's opened my eyes is just how much cross-cultural affinity there is throughout the world. People in Ireland have such a keen interest and understanding of indigenous peoples here in the United States. They know one another, even without knowing one another. They know the history. They know what it's like to speak or not speak your indigenous language. They know what it's like to practice or not be able to practice your indigenous spiritual or religious beliefs. So it's just been uncanny to learn from the Irish about Native American people. That might sound a little weird, but it actually is something that I've noticed more and more as I've traveled. The little guy down on the right, that is our grandson, Theodore Ronald Taylor. His dad is right here, and his mom is also a graduate of the University of Mary. So we like him. He likes to point, and he likes to learn a lot by pointing. So whatever he points at, we try to help describe that a little bit to him. So in the way of an outline of things I want to cover, I'll kind of breeze through this because I want to entertain some questions that you might have to elaborate further, is the way that I kind of organized the research in the book was something that occurred to me really quickly in a Native American context, indigenous context, which really kind of goes global, is the importance of story and how story evolved as ways in which to tell kind of the history of indigenous people. So I organized things in story, and as I interviewed Macaw Black Elk and looked at other research that kind of complemented it in a Native context, these are the stories that kind of evolved. Stories of exceptionality, stories of discovery and colonization, kind of the story of the family tree, which we all have, right? We all have descendants. We all have relatives. Stories of canonization, which is a big deal right now for Black Elk. He's been canonized, or he's in the process of being canonized by the Catholic Church, and then Native saints in general, and then finally bringing it together in terms of a really complex part that could be a talk all by itself in terms of the mystical part, and then I'll wrap up with just a couple things on that. So, first of all, to give you kind of the context a little bit more, is there's really, to me, an intersection that's led to really trying to get to this research and tell this story. And that comes in an intersection among three people. The guy with the pot belly sticking out of his shirt, that's me a long, long time ago. And that's me coming out of the inner city of Pontiac, Michigan during the riots in the late 60s. The city was literally burning. There was a lot of cultural strife going on. And we left. We were part of what some people call white flight. And we left the inner city. It was a struggle for my dad, who helped build a lot of homes in Pontiac, but that's what was going on. So right away as a young person, I was kind of had the impression of what it was like to be on different sides of cultural issues. And then down below, you can see a picture. This is at Holy Rosary Mission in Pine Ridge Reservation of myself, and that's Macaw Black Elk. He is the great-great-grandson of Black Elk himself. And then this rendering up here, uncanny painting of Black Elk. This is painted by a gentleman named Leonard Pelletier, who some of you might have heard of and not. He's from Turtle Mountain. His relatives are also from Standing Rock and also from Pine Ridge. He's, I don't know any other way to put it, he's in prison. He's part of the American Indian movement, and because of an altercation that occurred and the death of some FBI agents, he ended up in prison, and he's been there since the 1970s. But he's an artist, and he tries to kind of explain his cultural background and things through art. And that's a rendering of Black Elk, as I said. So anyways, this is the background and the context that I kind of looked at the things, and I want to give credit to Ross Doffett, who's spoken here on the campus. He wrote a book on Pope Francis. He thought it was really important to let people know the lens that he was looking through in order to write about Pope Francis. And that's why I'm spending a little time with an introduction to let you know the lens in which I'm looking at studying Black Elk and the way his life speaks that much more. So let's move through a couple of these stories. First of all, in terms of exceptional people, as I interviewed Macaw, I learned that Lakota people would self-identify as being exceptional. Now, for some of us, that might seem maybe boastful or prideful. That's not what they mean by exceptional. If you look at that picture and you see the bison and you see the prairie, and if you're from here or you're getting acclimated to the weather here, you realize that the weather can be a little bit brisk. And to survive and thrive on the plains takes an exceptional quality. And by exceptional, they don't mean in an individual sense, they mean in a collective sense. The way in which they work together as a group of people, of Lakota people, the way in which everyone had a major contribution to the survival and the thriving of a people. So still today, even in the face of all the historical challenges we'll talk about in a little bit, Lakota people, Native American people in general, would still identify in that capacity as exceptional. So, and I'll talk about survivance a little bit later, but in light of that exceptionality, the ability to adapt and to try to thrive and survive in the face of challenges. One of the challenges was the way in which Native American people, Black Elk himself, would have encountered Europeans who came to this country. Europeans came to this country with a very noble cause. It was to Christianize the world. But unfortunately, in the wake of that were some blemishes and were some unfortunate things that happened. The doctrine of discovery really was the catalyst. And if you look at some of our legal documents here in the United States and the Constitution and other legal documents, the doctrine of discovery language is still there in some senses. So this was the catalyst, along with Manifest Destiny, to kind of change the landscape of this continent. And again, in the wake of that came some unfortunate occurrences where Native American people tried to adapt and some could not. So this has been quite an impact on Native American people in so many ways, including Black Elk himself. And this kind of came out in some of the interviews with Macaw. Also, this was really a phrase that I had never really thought about in terms of the way in which Christianity was colonized. I always thought that Christianity colonized, but Christianity itself was colonized. So the United States government had policies in which kind of framed the way in which missionaries could go out and work with indigenous and other peoples in North America, in particular the United States. So this, in a sense, set a framework for Christian churches, Catholic churches, and other denominational churches. So this is what kind of framed that, and in that, other type of disciplines were affected, like anthropology and other social sciences. Anthropologists came out to the Great Plains and started to study the native people and report back to the government and other entities, universities, wherever they were from, about the behavior of Native American people. Unfortunately, what they missed were some really important qualities that were grounded in the indigenous language. And so what they reported was that there was this type of behavior, especially on a religious level, that was shamanistic and animistic, or even demonic. So this kind of set in precedence and set in motion an unfortunate way in which Native American spiritual and ritualistic practices were carried out. And so without the understanding of language, I think social scientists, religious figures, and others just kind of missed that beauty of the spiritual expression of Native American people. So this started to kind of set that difference, and also was grounded in policy and colonization as well. One group, though, that I want to say that kind of perceived this differently was the Jesuits, or the black robes, or black gowns, excuse me. Now, I'm not saying here that the Jesuits were perfect during this era. I'm saying that they approached it differently than maybe social scientists and other Christian churches did. Jesuits approached it because they were actually exiles too. They came from Germany. Germany was having a lot of political and religious strife during the time. They were exiled. They came here to the United States. There was a need for missionaries to go to the Great Plains because there was a call by those settlers that were out there for priests. So the Jesuits came out, and they started to try to figure out in what way are they going to mission to a people that didn't know English. They didn't know English, but the policy is that everyone knows English. So the Jesuits did something, I think, a little bit different in my research, and hearing from folks like Makah Black Elk and Black Elk himself, and what he writes is that the Jesuits started to learn Lakota. And in the process of learning Lakota and other indigenous languages like Ojibwa and others, they started to understand that this is a faith perspective that had some parallels, and started to incorporate those in their ministry. And so the interest became keener among Native American people in what Christianity had to offer, in particular Black Elk, as he started to consider Christianity, in particular Catholicism. All right, so taking a breath from that for a minute and looking at the family tree perspective that I looked at. There's all kinds of views of Black Elk, and they come through his family descendants, as I learned through interviewing Makah, whose picture is in the middle. Let me start up at the right-hand side with Ben Black Elk. This would be a relative of Black Elk. This would be Black Elk's son, who was kind of a product of his time. He was always traditional, never converted to Christianity, never had an interest in Christianity, stayed in his traditional ways. But if you're aware of some of the commercials that were run in the 50s and 60s, Ben Black Elk would have been a part of a number one of those ads that featured Native American people, regardless if it was to the environment or interviews or what have you. So he was very much a featured person. And if you visited Mount Rushmore during the time and might have seen a Native American person there who was sharing his culture, high probability that was Ben Black Elk sharing, or in the Duhamel Indian pageant, as they called it back in the time. So he's very much a product of his time. Charlotte, who is a granddaughter of Ben, very much an activist, very much traditional in her view of being a Lakota woman, and would not have agreed with the conversion of Black Elk to Christianity. She would have held that, she just wouldn't have been a person that would have held to that viewpoint. So in her relationship with Makah, this would be Makah's, now this is a little confusing, mother, aka grandmother. So Charlotte adopted Makah along with her husband Gerald, and so Makah would use interchangeable language with me when I interviewed. He would talk about his mom and his grandma, and I'm like, okay, we got to pin this down. What's going on? And so now then I understood that this was his grandma, but yet through adoption also his mother. So she would be very formative in his life from the traditional ways of being Lakota. His father, Makah's father, Gerald, went to seminary, almost became a Jesuit priest, left the seminary, became an engineer, and was a devout Catholic. So this young man, Macau, growing up, had in one ear a very devout Catholic father, and in the other ear a very traditional Lakota grandmother. And they had, as Macau shared with me, very fascinating discussions in the household. They were civil, which taught him a lot in his role now as as someone that's been involved in cultural healing in his community on Pine Ridge. And they were very, very informative and very educationally based. So it taught him a lot. So this is why he says the truth is somewhere in the middle. He's a devout Catholic man, Macau is, but he's also very respectful of his tradition as a Lakota man and knows that the two together is what forms him in his perception of what the truth is in his faith. Now we've got Black Elk here with the rosary and with his daughter Lucy. Lucy Black Elk is a person who would say that Black Elk, her dad, was a true convert to Catholicism and never looked back at his traditional ways. He became Catholic and after that never went back to his traditional ways. So she held to that very strongly to her death. She was interviewed by a priest, Jesuit priest named Father Michael Steltenkamp, who also had an advanced degree in anthropology, as Jesuits often will. And she is really one of the catalysts among others who kind of blew open this story about Black Elk for most of the second half of his life about his conversion to Christianity. A story that really hadn't been told too often prior to that. So this is why we now have this kind of tension in trying to understand the two. And on that tension is just more perspectives on Black Elk, even among people that know Black Elk and know his family and know his story. Some people would say he's a sinner. Some people would say he's a sellout. Some people would say he's a saint. Some people would say he's an opportunist. I mean, as a researcher and a person trying to get your head around this person, it would sometimes be a little confusing, but I think very formative because it gives the complexity of a person. And I think if we know our own stories, we understand what that complexity might be. Let me focus on one of them, which is sellout. As you might know, John Neihart, who was the first person to sit down with Black Elk and trying to understand who this mystical healer was, when he interviewed Black Elk, and then Native American people heard about this interview and then book later, a number of people, even still today, if you were to talk to them, especially those closest to Black Elk, would say he should have never told John Neihart any of those intimate stories of ritual practice and belief and spiritual beliefs like the sun dance and other things. This was not for everyone. This is for us to practice and to believe. And so there was a concern that if non-Native people knew these practices and stories, that there could be danger associated with their awareness of that. So that's why some people would say he's a sellout. Others would say he's a saint, and we'll get into that in a minute. Opportunist, what does that mean? Opportunist means that some people thought that he was really kind of playing both sides of being a Christian, in particular Catholic, and being a traditional Lakota man as he was raised all the way from his birthplace at the confluence of the Powder and Little Powder Rivers. And doing that for his people, though, not just for himself and all the opportunities he had to travel to England and everywhere else, but to do it for his own people because of the leadership responsibilities that he had. So these are examples of the tension that came through the interviews I had, the research, and the study. So in terms of the focus on sainthood for Black Elk, I think one of the things we need to look at is the evidence that's already been laid in the first Native American saint, which is Kateri Tekakwitha. So look at the process of the canonization for her, 1680 to 2012. Now, this isn't the longest process of canonization, but it's a pretty lengthy one. And the reason why it kind of had stops and starts is because of historical events. One of which was missionaries being called back from North America to Europe and then being sent back once once some disagreements and battles and things kind of subsided, missionaries were sent back. But while in Europe, these stories started to be circulated about this Mohawk woman in her devotion, in her faith, and all these type of things. So while those stories were percolating in the 1700s going into the 1800s, there was also something percolating in the United States. A wave of kind of what some would call an anti-Catholic sentiment by the United States government, where most missionaries that were sent out were not Catholic missionaries, but Protestant missionaries. But the problem is that a lot of the settlers who were moving west happened to be Catholic and were asking the United States government and the Catholic Church to send Catholic missionaries. So out comes the Catholic missionaries with this story to Native people about the devotion of this Native woman named Kateri Tekakwitha. So this kick-started the cause for her sainthood. And interesting fact, when Black Elk was in Standing Rock for a Catholic Congress, there was a circulation of a petition for Kateri Tekakwitha's kind of restart to her canonization. Black Elk signed that petition. So one potential saint signs another now saint's cause for sainthood. I just thought that was uncanny. That was unearthed by an archivist from Marquette, by the way, Marquette University, Mark Thiel. And he will go to his deathbed saying that was definitely Black Elk's signature. Now, you're going, well, what's the big deal? What kind of nerdy stuff is that? Well, if you don't know, there's a lot of people whose names are Black Elk. Last names, people might have written their name, if they could write in English differently, but Mark Thiel has pinned the time frame of Black Elk and is convinced, and I believe is evidence, that Black Elk would have signed on to that petitioning cause. So other things that have kind of been, that have evolved since this process of Kateri Tekakwitha's sainthood that are important when we consider the sainthood of Black Elk is this sense of the perceptions of Kateri Tekakwitha by Native American people. Some of you might be aware of what they call kind of the communion of saints, or people's ability to kind of commune or talk with the saints, have saints intercede for them. This is very much in the spirit of Catholicism. Native American people really have that uncanny ability too, and I would say in a little bit keener sense, this communion with the saints, with Kateri Tekakwitha. There's been interview after interview after interview of Native American people at the Kateri Tekakwitha conference on their perceptions of Kateri Tekakwitha, especially leading to her sainthood. And it's uncanny the way people would talk about her as if she is presently alive, as if she's a role model, a great auntie, they would say in a lot of cases, or just the mere fact that she's a holy woman who's Indian, as they would say. And that's good enough for them, even though they have no perception of another tribe outside their own. So there's just rafts and rafts of these interviews that were done. And I think those perceptions, kind of going down a little bit further, are what's really critical, I think, if we're interested and involved in this cause for the sainthood of Black Elk. That I think Native perceptions, Native experiences, Native American qualities in terms of their interest in Christianity, in particular Catholicism, are really key in the consideration of Black Elk as a saint. Now, what else is going on in the cause? He's a tiny saint. Some of you may know. This is just the quality that has evolved, which is kind of put more on the radar screen, the cause for Black Elk sainthood. This, if you're not aware, and some of you in the room might be in North Hall, this is in North Hall. I was stunned when I heard about it, and I ran over and took a picture of it, is that this is a picture of Black Elk in ceremonial dress, and this really stunning quote, and then about where he is in the cause as a servant of God. So, and then this question mark's just here to just kind of like make us pause and think about where the cause is going from here. Where are all these stories, all this history, all this tension leading us to his cause? And I would submit, like, can we carry all that into what would classify him as a saint? Can we carry the history, which at points was tragic, genocidal, and at other times triumphant. Can we carry all that in the description of this particular saint? And I think we can learn a lot from, especially the canonization of Kateri Tekakwitha. I think I'm stuck here. Let's see if we can advance. Must have really talked a long time on that slide. Okay, so to kind of wrap this up a little bit and bring it to a close and then get into some discussion. So hopefully I'm expressing this well, that there's complexity in this understanding of Black Elk, understanding of Indigenous people, and it goes even deeper. I have to say, this is why I think this slide could be a whole presentation in itself. The complexity in terms of understanding a person like Black Elk, Makah Black Elk as his great-great-grandson, and interviewing him came through in the interviews and other understandings from other Indigenous, primarily scholars. And that starts with, I think, a non-Indigenous person like Thomas Merton, who just said that a certain level of mysticism, it's like a spiritual illumination beyond the ordinary consciousness. So that's something to think about in itself. But Black Elk himself would have said, silence is the voice of the great mysterious. Okay, silence is very much in the Christian tradition of prayer and contemplation, to be able to kind of divine the Creator, divine God. And also you can see the tension in terms of beliefs and some of the other things that are there. And also, Old Meadow's comment about the great amount of scholarship, which I could see as well, and I was so thankful for the interviews and then digging out and finding Indigenous scholarship to really find what was missing. And I think what was missing is this understanding, the depth of spirituality, the depth of understanding of Indigenous spiritual practices, and in particular Black Elk, who his great-great-grandson Makah identified as a paragon. Another interesting little fact that came to me that I was unaware of is the involvement of Carl Gustav Jung, not a theologian, if you know him. He's Freudian. He's a disciple of Sigmund Freud. But Jung really dug into the book Black Elk Speaks. And if he wouldn't have dug into that book in Europe, I wouldn't be talking about Black Elk today, I'm pretty convinced. And I don't think Black Elk Speaks would be in its multiple editions today, and also in countless different languages. Jung got a hold of it. It blew his mind, as Jung tends to have his mind blown. It blows my mind when I read him. He identified with the symbolic, ritualistic patterns of Indigenous spirituality, shared it with colleagues, started to become the hot read in Europe, and guess what? It came back here in the late 50s, going into the 60s, became a cult classic. If that doesn't make sense to you, ask a grandparent, ask a parent, ask an uncle. Someone in your family probably read Black Elk Speaks. Keep asking if you're not finding that yet. But there was a connection. So you can imagine being John Neinhardt. He's in his 70s. He wrote a book almost 40 years ago, and it went nowhere. And now all of a sudden, he's interviewed on television, which didn't exist when he wrote the book. And now it's just an amazing focus on a mystical person. Also imagine this, people flocking to where Black Elk lived, knocking on people's door going, tell us about this incredible healer, this mystic. And people are coming to the door, and some people didn't even know who Black Elk was, on his own reservation, maybe couldn't even tell. And this is one of the concerns that people have with maybe when he's canonized as a saint, is would that maybe be a complication for some who don't have the same kind of identification with Black Elk as others have? So a lot of depth, a lot of complexity here. Okay, wrapping it up a little bit, trying to put a bow on this, is really when I kind of distilled this down into a couple areas, I really looked at it in this context. I try to look at Black Elk first in the context of all this history, all this understanding in terms of, and I felt inclined to do that as an educator and an education professor in the terms of education and as an educator. One of the dilemmas I found going back to the introduction and talking about Ireland was And Ben Black Elk, I think, hit it pretty well, is people, European people and people outside of North America tend to know quite a bit about Native American people and indigenous peoples more than we do. I think that's evolving, but I think that's still a challenge in a lot of ways. And you can tell by the conversations and the way in which people kind of less romanticize Native American people, I would say, than actually kind of focus in. And sometimes it's just the way in which people identify. Also, there's this sense of indigenizing the academy. What that means is just to broaden out, and the academy would refer to colleges and universities, to just broaden out perceptions of cultures and recognize that there are a whole milieu of cultures that go into the process of learning. And that acknowledgement can really make fuller the learning process. The other part is as a culture bearer. Black Elk and a number of mystical and culture bearer type people in the Native tradition are really critical, and we found this out in COVID. So this was during the part of COVID, some of these interviews, and the fact that people who are culture bearers responsible for the language, Lakota or otherwise, and other things, were dying due to COVID. And this was a problem because the language could die, and if the language dies, the cultural identity dies. So this was very much put a lot of stress and strain on indigenous cultures. So the fact that Black Elk, I think, remains today as a culture bearer and a symbol of that was a really important, I think, implication that I brought out of it. Also, I think Black Elk is a model of survivance, different from survival. Survivance is an active presence. It's an active, sometimes, resistance. It's what I think a lot of people in a Black Elk were here today would still say, we are still here. Now, it seems like maybe an odd comment, but to a Native American person, they have to bring this to our presence because oftentimes the perception of Native American people are still on horses, still in teepees, still in other dwellings. It's just a romanticized historical view. When in fact, Native American people are not only thriving as a group of people, cultural group, but making significant contributions to this country and other countries in North America. So it's very much an important perception that I think came through, and this is why I think we are talking about Black Elk today, and why I think he's very much been, in conversations that we've been involved with, a symbol of cultural healing among people. So finally, just to wrap up things, is I never thought I would go back to John Neihart, the original researcher and person who met Black Elk, and you can see them in conversation. This is right by Manderson, South Dakota on the Pine Ridge Reservation. I just visited there in August. There's a little cabin next to it that I finally found. It was like a wild goose chase, but I finally found the cabin. And this quote, which I won't read in detail, but really just symbolizes, I think, the journey that I've been on as well as a researcher and other journeys that people have been on in their encounters with culture, other cultures like Native American people, and iconic mystical figures like Black Elk. There's just a change, you can see in this quote, a change in perception, a change in understanding. And this last part that said, the old prophet's wish that I bring his message to the world is actually being fulfilled. Perhaps with this message spreading across the world, he has not failed. Now, think about that for a minute. Black Elk, when he died in 1950, he was born around 1863, went to his deathbed maybe thinking that all his life added up to nothing. He just was not convinced that the sacred hoop, that the relations among people was closing and in a positive way. He just really had that kind of dark night of the soul, that kind of St. John of the Cross moment where he just didn't know. Because at the time, he went through a lot of calamity. The Wounded Knee massacre that happened in 1890, he really thought that was an apocalyptic moment. He really thought that the world was ending. So all these things were happening to his people, and he just didn't know. So John Neihart wanted us to know, and I think he's dead on, and this is why I came back to him, is that he didn't fail, because his story is still being shared, and you're being attentive and appreciative, and I appreciate you hanging in there with me about the story. And now the story is global, because a global church like the Catholic Church is telling his story, and people are rallying around this person as a paragon, as a beacon, not only for faith, but I think for cultural healing among people, which hopefully we can all see is much needed and can often be done around the stories that are so critical among our own cultures in relation to other cultures. So I will stop talking. Hopefully we have a few minutes for questions. And I've just got some information up there. I have some prayer cards here, some other information. If you're interested more in Black Elk, especially his cause, the Diocese of Rapid City has been a tremendous resource, and they are the ones that have started the cause. I've been invited to be on a working group that advises the postulators, or those that are kind of gathering information on his cause for sainthood. So please seek some of these resources if you would like to, and I've just got some contact information. So thank you. Any questions? I think there's a mic here. I mean, there's a mic here, but a mic here too. Dr. Sportello, thank you.
Okay, now the light is green, so it's on. Thanks for your talk. One thing you said made me want to know more. You said something about how, if I got this right, shamanistic animism was what anthropologists call the religion of many Native American tribes, but you said they didn't understand the language. Can you say more about what you had in mind there? Right.
So this came through first in the interviews with Macaw Black Elk. It kind of piqued my ear because he kept saying anthropologists, anthropologists. And you hear that among Native American people, and it's often said in a derogatory tone, just because of things that have led to maybe the harvesting of bones and relics and arrowheads and all kinds of things that have ended up in closets and displays, and now they're being repatriated back to native lands, which is great. But I think when you look at the research and you listen to folks, and in the interviews I had, you see that there was in the social scientists, namely anthropologists, they missed delving into the language and understanding the language. And I think if they delved into the language, they'd find that those practices, for the most part, were not that. And there were more, as the Jesuits found when they learned the language and started to incorporate it in their liturgies, that there were more parallels than there were distinctions. So that's kind of my point, and I found that myself. I'm not fluent in Lakota at all, but I found that when I've endeavored to understand, and I didn't really get into this particular picture too much. Oh, it's working now, good. But this story is incredible. This is a story that predates Christianity, of a son ascending to the Father. Does it sound familiar? Yeah. And this story is recounted at White Butte, which is in the western part of North Dakota. This is where Lakota people traditionally would go to pray during the solstice, the winter solstice, and they would recount in an astrological sense, kind of using the stars, about this son figure that ascended to the Father. And this predates Christianity. So I'm like, whoa. I mean, and this was a 45-minute story that was shared to me by Dakota Goodhouse, who's a graduate of the University of Mary. When I asked him, what do you think Black Elk saw at the sacred tree? Some people thought he saw a Christ-like figure. Some people thought he saw another spiritual being. He went on for 45 minutes about this story, because Black Elk would have been formed in this tradition. He would have heard this story. He would have been told this story. He had visions about this story. So this kind of gets into the complexity and depth. But then when when he started to observe Christianity when he was in Europe and then back in the United States, he was really respectful of the religious practices and the devotion of Christian people. And guess what? He started to hear the story about this son who ascended to the Father. That would have been recognizable to him. So going back to your point, Dr. Sportello, about kind of what the anthropologists missed and what other social scientists miss and what some missionaries missed is, I think, some common language, although the languages weren't common, if that makes sense. So, thank you. Probably have time for what? Maybe one more question?
Thank you. I was just wondering what where you guys are on the canonization of Black Elk. Like, are there any impediments that you've approached so far, or like, what's the pathway like that right now?
Yeah, thank you. So currently he's a servant of God. There's the need for 2 miracles for him to be fully canonized as a saint. One of the things I experienced directly that really, I think, kick-started the process has only been in motion since 2017. So I think it's relatively early, especially if you've ever worked with Rome. Things don't happen too quickly there. So, but it's moving along. I think one thing that kickstarted it was last summer in July in Minneapolis at the 84th Annual Tekakwitha Conference. So there was one of the postulators, Deacon Bill White, who is a Catholic deacon on the Pine Ridge Reservation, and he made an announcement that, that he's a postulator, and that if anybody has prayed for the intercession of Black Elk and there's been miracles attributed, to come and see him. He had lines of people coming to talk to him. So like what they shared, we haven't met since that time to kind of hear maybe where that process is at. So I think the point is that as this discussion happens more and more, I think there's the probability and the possibility of more miracles. Which if you're aware of the miracle process, it isn't just snap of a finger. There has to be a medical situation in which there's no medical explanation, where the devil's advocate or where someone in the medical profession has to say, there's just no explanation for that miracle. We can't explain. So I would imagine that these are kind of in the pipeline right now, so to speak. The Jesuit superior from Rome did come 2 summers ago to his memorial mass. Every August 17th, on the anniversary of Black Elk's death, there's a memorial service and mass in Manderson at St. Agnes Church where Black Elk went. And he didn't have any news to report, as a lot of people were really anxious, like, oh, is he going to announce something, this guy from Rome? But what he announced was he has a lot to take back to Pope Francis. He has a lot to tell him. So the good news is that the Jesuits are working really hard on the canonization on the ground in Pine Ridge. There's a Jesuit who's the primary person responsible for canonization in Rome, and the Pope's a Jesuit. So we hope that that's the trifecta for his canonization sooner than later. So, yes. I think we've got like 30-ish seconds or so before folks have to get going. So.
It just occurred to me, you told the story about Black Elk signing the petition for the canonization of St. Kateri. Perhaps one of the people in this room signing a petition for Black Elk's canonization will someday be discovered, as their own canonization goes forward.
Absolutely. That's a great point to close on. So thank you. And thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time. And if there's any resources that we can share with you, please feel free to come up and grab some. Have a good weekend, everybody.